In a video, What Does the Quran Say About the Crucifixion of Jesus? Under Dr. Craig videos on YouTube, Dr. William Lane Craig answers a response from a questioner in the audience regarding the crucifixion in the Quran.
Yes, I'm wondering if you could respond to the Muslim belief that Jesus actually wasn't crucified at all, that
Yes.
God made it appear to be the case, and therefore his resurrection appearances would not actually be resurrection appearances.
Yes. Perhaps the most interesting response that I've received so far was the claim by Shabir Ally, who is a Canadian Muslim apologist. He is willing to agree that Jesus was in fact crucified, which really compromises the Quran, because the Quran says they did not crucify him. But Ali is willing to grant that he was crucified, but he says he wasn't actually killed. Ali subscribes to the apparent death theory, and he thinks that they took him down alive from the cross, placed him in the tomb, and before he could die in the tomb, Allah assumed him into heaven. So he will go, like 90% of the way toward the Christian view, but then at the last minute, he has a sort of body-snatching view of Jesus where God takes him away. I pointed out to Shabir in the debate that what this means is that Allah then deceived 1/3 of the world's population by foisting Christianity upon the world, by snatching away the body of Jesus so the disciples would find the empty tomb, see these appearances and think he's risen from the dead, and thereby Allah has deceived most of the world into believing in Christianity, which is surely implausible. And he didn't have a good response to that.
In response to the audience member, William Lane Craig asserts the following points regarding Shabir Ally. Number one, that Shabir Ally's views conflict with the Quran, and that Shabir Ally's interpretation of the Quran implies God's deception of the disciples that he was raised from the dead, and that Shabir's silence on the issue was a major problem. I'd like to present the following PowerPoint presentation to make some reply to some of the comments that Dr. Craig has made. The official response of Shabir Ally is made on his website, and I urge everyone who's watching this video to go ahead and take a look at that. Number one, does Shabir Ally's view conflict with the Quran? Dr. Craig asserts that Shabir's view on the crucifixion compromises the Quranic view. Number two, Dr. Craig asserts that Shabir Ally did not have a response to the fact that his position implies that God had deceived the disciples into thinking that Jesus had risen from the dead. So I'm going to take each one of these points one by one. So the first thing is, does Shabir Ally's position contradict the Quran? 4:157, in which the Quran states that وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ, that they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but rather it was made to appear to them. Now it is true that the most common interpretation is that Jesus was never placed on the cross throughout many works of Quranic exegesis, but this is not Shabir Ally's view. In fact, he has presented a different view based on the definition of crucifixion and how the word crucifixion or salb is used in the Quran. So the word crucifixion can be used in two ways. Number one, to actually kill a person by impalement, and in this case impalement on the cross, or simply impaling a person regardless of whether or not he actually dies by that method. The Quran always uses the word crucifixion or salb in the first way, that is to kill a person by means of impalement. So thus the Quran isn't actually necessarily denying that he was put on the cross. Rather, it is maintaining that they did not kill him by putting him on a cross. Therefore, there actually is no contradiction between Shabir Ally's view and the view that the Quran is purporting. So they did not kill him by means of impalement is what Shabir Ally is actually suggesting that the Quran says. Thus, there is no contradiction between Shabir Ally's view and that of the Quran. The question of whether God deceived the disciples into thinking that Jesus was actually raised from the dead. Now, there's a couple of points here. Number one, the deception issue presupposes the fact that we actually have the words of Jesus' disciples in the New Testament, and that we can actually know exactly and precisely what they believed. But this is extremely doubtful. The other issue is that God's actions are often misunderstood, and people, especially common folk, can jump to the wrong conclusions. Just to give you a couple of examples, Mary of Magdala had incorrectly inferred that Jesus' body was stolen. For example, in John 20, verses 1 through 2, it says that on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early, and while it was still dark, she saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. And then she ran and she went to tell Peter and the other disciples, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Obviously, this had not occurred. According to the Gospels, Jesus was raised from the dead. But Mary Magdalene made this conclusion erroneously. So what she reported initially as a fact was actually an incorrect inference. She jumped to a false conclusion without actually examining the evidence. Let's give another example from the New Testament. When Peter miraculously escapes from Herod's prison and he arrives at the door of the house of some worshippers, Rhoda, one of the servants, hears his voice. So she recognizes that it's Peter, and she goes inside and she tells the people that Peter is alive and he's at the door. But instead of checking the evidence, what do the people do? They respond that it's not possible that it could be Peter. In fact, they tell her that she is out of her mind. And then while she keeps insisting, they say, okay, it must be his angel. Peter keeps on knocking, and then they open the door and they see him and they are astonished. That's another example of people in the New Testament jumping into conclusions without actually looking at the evidence. In fact, in this circumstance, their prior belief was actually more compelling than the evidence of one of their compatriots. It was only after Peter had to keep knocking on the door to see Peter himself that they actually believed. Now, were the disciples immune from this? The disciples also could reach major conclusions based on inadequate observations. And this is seen at the post-resurrection stories as reported in the Gospels. For example, at the end of the Gospel of Matthew 28:17, it says, "They worshipped him, but they doubted." In some versions of the Bible, it says, "Some doubted." So did they worshiping without being sure that this was the risen Jesus? The disciples on the road to Emmaus in Luke's Gospel. The disciples were walking with Jesus whom they didn't recognize throughout the journey, and when they stopped, they invited him into the house. He broke bread, but as soon as he broke bread and vanished, they began telling each other that that was Jesus. And evidence for this, they said that their hearts were burning while he was explaining to them the scriptures during the journey. So they hurry back to Jerusalem and they go to the 11 apostles. And just when they're about to tell their stories, they find them saying that the Lord has truly been raised and has appeared to Simon. Verse 24-34. But here's the problem. We don't know precisely when this happened. We don't know the time, and the place are not mentioned. But in the Gospel of John, we see that Peter and another disciple had ran to the tomb after they found out that Jesus' body was missing. The other disciple had seen that the burial cloth was rolled up. Did Peter believe? It would seem so, because at that evening they said that Jesus had appeared to Peter. But in that case, we have an evolution of belief. We have Peter seeing rolled linen cloth and believing based on that. And this becomes a vision to Peter, which the disciples from Emmaus soon come to discover as soon as they go to report about their journey with Jesus and their breaking of bread with Jesus when they met back where the disciples were. In this case, we have a rapid evolution of belief that was arrived at from the simplest forms of evidence. If someone took away Jesus' body, they could have also rolled up the cloths, couldn't they? So the rolled up cloths is not evidence in itself that Jesus had resurrected from the dead. But if Peter is saying that he believed that Jesus rose from the dead simply from seeing the cloths, by that evening, others were saying that Peter had actually seen Jesus. Thus, we see a clear evolution of belief. In conclusion, there was no deception on the part of the believers in case of Shabir Ally's explanation. In fact, there was a deception to the disbelievers by God, because they had thought that they had killed Jesus by the means of crucifixion, but they obviously didn't succeed in doing so according to the Quran. This was simply a stock or a common use argument to the classic Muslim position, which Shabir Ally himself was not purporting.